The purpose of this screencast is to read an article called The Legacy of Treaties, and then to complete a handout called Reading Purpose 3, Legacy of Treaties. The reading is on page 116 in the Northern Lights textbook, and it's a single page that looks like this. And the handout is two-sided, and it's got a before reading activity, it's got some while you read activities, and then it's got an after you read activity. And while you read, which is the biggest part, has 4 questions that you need to respond to. So I like to take a look at the handout. As a class, you already completed the before you read activity and you defined what a legacy is, so you know what the word legacy means. And also learning goals. Students will know why a treaty signed many years ago still matters. But while you read, this is what you're doing. You will read the insert on page 116, The Legacy of Treaties in the Northern Lights textbook. I just showed you that. Then you're going to respond to the question by rewriting the direct quote. It's usually 1 or 2 sentences from the reading that helps you respond to the question. So in other words, you're not answering the question in your own words. Rather, you're going back to the reading, finding a quote, and writing it in the box. So here are the questions, which I like to always preview the questions before reading so that you know what you're looking for. Why is the reservation system complex? We're going to find a quote that answers that. Goals for the reservation. Why is the relationship between American Indian groups and the U.S. government strained? So I'm going to find a quote for why that relationship is strained. Number 3, reservations today. How are today's reservations sovereign? So I have to think about what that word sovereign means, and then I need to find a quote that shows why reservations are sovereign land. Ongoing debate, fishing rights. What did the U.S. Supreme Court's 1999 ruling in Minnesota versus Mille Lacs Band of Chippewa mean for the Ojibwe? And so then I'm going to find a direct quote that answers that. Also, take a look. We have these ongoing debate, fishing rights, reservations today, the reservation system, goals for reservations. And when I go back to the reading, I'll see that we have these headings as well. And so we can preview the reading. The Legacy of Treaties is the title, and then there's that reservation system, ongoing debate, or reservations today, goals for reservations, ongoing debate, fishing rights. So these headings are also, use them as a clue for where that quote might exist. So I'm going to start the reading. The Legacy of Treaties. Does a treaty signed more than 150 years ago still matter? Many treaties signed between American Indian nations and the U.S. government remained in effect today. As long as that is the case, both sides are legally required to obey the terms of the treaty. Now, we've been seeing that there's a lot of terms of treaties that maybe aren't recognized or the laws aren't being followed. So these treaty laws should still matter, is what this paragraph is saying. The reservation system. Most treaties in Minnesota created reservations on small portions of the land purchased by the U.S. government. Reservations were pieces of land reserved specifically for the American Indian nation signing a treaty. This means that while the American Indian nation had exclusive rights to the land and the resources on it, they didn't outright own it. It was and still is a complicated arrangement. So this describes that Native American reservation land does belong to the American Indian nation, but to a certain extent it's still owned by the American government. So it's a complex situation. Goals for reservations. American Indians maintained sovereignty or control of their affairs on their reservations. They expected this land to be a place where they could live as they had traditionally, hunting, fishing, ricing, and planting their food. The U.S. government, however, considered reservations to be places where American Indians could learn to farm and live like American settlers. This conflict strained relations between American Indian nations and the government for many years. So, what strained relationships on these reservations? Well, it was the goals of the reservations. American Indians saw them as places they could live using their traditional way of life, whereas the American government saw reservations as places where Native Americans could learn to live like whites. Reservations today. Many reservations and communities established through treaties still exist today. Tribal governments create laws on tribal lands that are enforced by tribal police forces. American Indian nations and the U.S. government continue to work closely with one another. This is because of the special relationship that exists between the sovereign nations that negotiated the treaties. So still to this day, American Indian nations have their own systems of government and ways of policing, etc., on the reservations, but they work closely with the U.S. government to enforce certain laws, etc. Ongoing debate, fishing rights. Disagreements still arise over how to interpret treaties today. Legal cases about treaty issues have gone all the way to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the United States. One such case was Minnesota versus the Mille Lacs Band of Chippewa, 1999. And Chippewa is another word for Ojibwe or Anishinaabe. So these are people that live in northern Minnesota or come from northern Minnesota. In this case, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that Ojibwe from Mille Lacs Reservation could continue to hunt and fish in their traditional ways on lands they had ceded or turned over in an 1837 treaty with the United States. Language in the treaty reserved the right of the Ojibwe to hunt and fish traditionally, even when they were off the reservation. So according to the treaty, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, or Chippewa people should be able to fish in their traditional way. Over time, the state of Minnesota passed laws that restricted the rights of the Ojibwe to hunt and fish using traditional methods. The Supreme Court ruled that the state of Minnesota had to follow the terms of the 1837 treaty. Years after the court decision, many people on both sides of this issue still have strong feelings. So, why do treaties matter? Well, we look here, we see that Minnesota made specific laws saying that Ojibwe couldn't fish in their traditional way, but the U.S. Supreme Court said that the 1837 treaty still holds up. So you have a conflict there between what Minnesota laws say and what the Supreme Court says. And then it's important to look at this map real quickly, and you can see the dates here are when all the land was turned, these are the dates of the treaties and when the land was turned over to the U.S. government. And you can see that they are either Ojibwe cessions, which means when Ojibwe gave away land, or Dakota cessions, which is when the Dakota gave away land. And then the year of the treaty, of course, I pointed out as the date, and then the boundaries are the lines between them. So you can see how Minnesota was carved up and turned over to the U.S. government through treaties. Okay, so now I want to go to my sheet. And I want to answer this first question, the reservation system. Why is the reservation system complex? Well, if I go back to my reading, I remember reading about that here. And I'm going to kind of mean reservations were a piece of land. Okay, so reservations were a piece of land reserved specifically for the American Indian nation signing a treaty. This means that while the American Indian nation had exclusive rights to the land and the resources on it, they didn't outright own it. It was and still is a complicated arrangement. So here is my quote that I think makes it complicated is, this means that while the American Indian nation had exclusive rights to the land and the resources on it, they didn't outright own it. So I'm going to take this quote and I'm going to place it in this box. So when it's all said and done, you have this answer. Why was the reservation system complex? Well, when I looked at the reading, it was This means that while the American Indian Nation had exclusive rights to the land and the resources on it, they didn't outright own it. That's why it was complex, and that comes directly from the reading. So I pulled a quote out that helps me answer the question. So you're not coming up with the words on your own, you're just taking out the quote itself. And then you'll do this for numbers 1 through 4, and then number 5, you answer on your own. Because it asks you, why do treaties matter? And then you come up with your own answer. All right, thank you.